Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AI+HI project. I'm Alex Alonso, SHRM's Chief Data and Insights Officer. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm really excited about today's episode, in large part because each week we talk and we get a chance to sit down with visionaries from the field of tech, from business, from HR, to provide kind of deep insights, actionable kind of guidance and strategy, as well as practical advice for harnessing the transformation potential between artificial intelligence and human ingenuity, or as we like to call it, AI+HI. This week, I'm very fortunate to be joined by one of our most distinguished guests ever. Uh, and I'm throwing all lauding all the praise at you, sir. We're exploring the role of AI, specifically around workplace training, learning, and skills development. And I get the good luck and the good fortune of doing this with Scott Horn, CEO of ACI Learning, a provider of IT, cybersecurity, and audit training for organizations around the world. But some background around Scott: he's a former CMO, steeped in that field significantly. He's someone who's had several different positions and held various operator roles across several industries. And secretly, I think he has a passion for bots as well. So maybe we'll find another time to talk about bots as well. Welcome to the program, Scott.
Thank you, Alex. I'm really thrilled to be here. Should be a lot of fun.
Why don't you take a moment to tell us a little bit about what makes Scott so awesome and why you're so steeped in this topic? But then beyond that, tell us a little bit about ACI Learning.
Oh, yeah. Well, that sounds a little bit like a setup, but I'll give it my best shot. So, as Alex mentioned, I'm an operator. I've been a marketing leader several times, a sales leader, as well as a product leader across multiple organizations. I also happen to have started out as a software engineer. So it's a little bit unusual. The thing that's so interesting about this topic is marketing seems to be one of the places where AI really took hold early. There's multiple applications, multiple use cases. And when I came to ACI Learning initially as the chief marketing officer, it was exciting to see the team here was already using it in a variety of ways. So now, as the leader of the company, where we're really going is we're a technology company that helps learners learn and leaders develop their teams. So what does that mean? We have a SaaS platform that can deliver training, in multiple forms around multiple topics, assessments, the ability to practice with real world labs, and then to actually share those learnings, those skill capabilities and development with the groups you're in, either socially, externally, or within your company. So as a leader in an IT or cyber or another field, what you can do is take a look at the capabilities of your team, compare and contrast them over time, compare to other groups. And that platform is called MyACI, and we continue to develop it. In fact, one of the interesting things we'll probably talk about is we've integrated an AI course mentor into that platform itself to take advantage of Gen AI.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate that kind of background. I think it's an area where we really don't think enough about the capabilities of AI. And I myself am someone who considers himself sort of an anthropologist of AI and the world of work, right? I'm not a technologist. I don't have any coding background. I'm a organizational psychologist by training. So talk about, completely the other side of the world, right? But so many implications for humans in general, especially as it relates to their journey and their experience, both as customer as well as internal customer and stakeholder. I guess now I want to do a deep dive into some of the big thoughts, I guess, and ask you specifically, like, where do you see AI fundamentally transforming things like the way that we approach workforce development and training and upskilling, reskilling, those kinds of things? Where do you see that going?
Well, I'll start a little broader and then kind of dial it in there. And in fact, it's one of the things we're talking about ACI Learning because, first of all, I view AI as a productivity enhancer. A good analogy is calculators. 50, 60 years ago, schools didn't want calculators, didn't want children bringing them in. A lot of people in the audience probably remember those days. Now, nobody does long division in college. You'd use a calculator. You do things. AI is very much like that. So it's a productivity enhancer. It can be applied across a wide range of domains, Alex, in companies. Specifically in kind of the learning, talent, HR fields, Well, there's a lot of things you can do. Skills assessment, AI training, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Things like actually using it as a bot to help get answers. So, for example, I want to know how to get a payroll stub. I want to know how to apply for, time off. I'm onboarding. Help me onboard. I have questions about the company. I just heard this three-letter acronym. What does that mean? So there's a lot of use cases out there. In fact, one of the things I kind of touched on this in ACI we're thinking about is I see many, as the CEO, I see many, many opportunities to apply it. The challenge is the field is changing so quickly. AI, we're going to talk about pros and cons. One thing that's a pro, but also a challenge, the state of the art is changing incredibly rapidly. Now there's so many LLMs. You've got ChatGPT 4.0, you've got Claude, you've got Lambda, you've got a whole bunch of them, and each one of them is changing. And that's not to even mention you've got software vendors, everybody from Salesforce to Workday, integrating capabilities in like we are. So in some ways, companies are dying to apply it like we are. Like, let's look at how can we use AI in HR? How can we use AI for data analytics? How can we use AI for marketing? The challenge is people are busy with their day jobs, and even understanding what the art of the possible is requires monitoring of the field. So we're thinking about that. In fact, one of the things I'm considering is creating kind of an AI strategy role whose job it is to work with the other functional leaders within the org to identify areas where we can apply AI, whether it's a productivity boost, an ROI, savings, and there's a lot of opportunities. But I think people just left to their own devices, it's tough to keep up, and people have day jobs. So I think companies are all wrestling with this.
That's fascinating because one of the things that, so in my role here at SHRM, I get to really focus on research. I get to lead the insights business within SHRM. And we found over the course of the last year that organizations, there's been a wave of kind of adoption and testing and trying and doing all the things. And organizations themselves, talent leaders as well as technologists, are saying that they can't keep up with the evolution of AI, right?
Exactly.
Implementation actually creates more drag in some cases because you're not doing all the things that it can do. And by the time that they get there, it'll be too late because there's already a new iteration, a new kind of feature, a better option, all those things. And so it reminds me sort of, to your point, I remember reading years ago an IBM study that looked specifically at this problem of skilling in general, right? And they talked about how skills become obsolete in some sectors within 6 to 8 months, but it takes a year to be truly proficient in it.
Mhm.
So is that skill even necessary if it takes me a year and it's already obsolete by the time that I get proficient, right? It's quite the conundrum. I raised that in large part because it also makes me think about, in your estimation, and I know that we're keeping this as a very organic conversation. In your estimation, how many of your clients or your just in your view around organizations are you seeing that are struggling with that kind of tension, right? I want to keep up, and at the same time, I can't keep up no matter what I do, either on the people or the tech side.
Yeah, quite a few. Candidly, I think what we see is several challenges. One is the one you mentioned, and we talked about can't keep up. Another one is the data. One of the things that I'll say the HR talent space has going for it is the data is pretty structured for the most part. That's a real advantage. In fact, that makes me very optimistic about applying it. That's a challenge. Another challenge is, as I said, people just knowing the art of the possible. Like, there's now we're kind of in this weird in between state where people have to adapt themselves to the LLMs. I have to know how to prompt it, doing little things like thanking the LLM or saying please or explaining, hey, it's me, Scott, and here's why I'm asking. If you fast forward 5, 10 years, that's probably not going to be the case. And we're already starting to see other modalities like, okay, now I can use vision, I can use audio, multiple things. I can ingest documents of various forms. So I think that's one of the big things we're going to see, which is the AI platforms will adapt themselves more to humans than is the reverse to today.
That speaks to something kind of interesting. I remember being in a room with Ethan Mollick where he was presenting one.
Oh, brilliant guy.
Brilliant guy, and I'll never forget. He says, and we're sitting there and we're educating CEOs, right, like yourself, and that time is valuable when you get in front of CEOs. And he had the room completely mesmerized at our CEO Academy event. And one of the things that he talked about was never forget to encourage it the way you would a human employee. It
Yeah.
actually changes what you get out of AI, especially the LLMs, right? I To me, that also speaks to the power of personalization. And I know you talk a lot about this in your thought leadership and in the way that you approach things. I'd love to hear, because you think of AI as a machine, right? And to some people, they still think of it as a machine, not as my partner, not as my coworker, right? How do you get over that impersonal vibe that people bring to it because it is a technology? Where do you see that kind of shifting?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to it, like most things. Number one, I think we're going to see more and more, I'll call it the LLMs, will actually give hints. It'll say, Alex, would you like to do this? Hey, here's an easy way to do it. So I think you'll get more. In fact, one of the most interesting things, it's fun to do, Chat GPT or whatever your favorite is go in and ask Chat GPT how it would recommend you ask Chat GPT to do something.
Yeah.
It actually helps you do it. So I think there's that part. The other thing that's interesting about AI, and this is where we really saw it in marketing first, is it enables mass scale personalization. Like you can do things like, hey, Alex, I'm using your name. I'm trying to understand you. Now, the obvious risk in all this, and we touched on it earlier, you got to be clear. I would highly recommend be clear about when you're speaking with an artificial construct versus a human. I mean, it's just a good practice to do. People should know. Some people, for a variety of reasons, and it's a choice, would rather interact with a human, and they should be given that choice if it exists. Now, that said, I think over time, what you're going to see is companies like, I worked at a chatbot company several years back, so I got to see this. This was back in the mid-teens. Interacting with the human is expensive. So you may see companies say, hey, Alex, if you're willing to work with our bot here, which you kind of see that today where people try to push you to a text message or a chat. It's going to be one of these things where, look, if you really want to speak to a human, Alex, we can make that happen, but here's what it's going to cost. So I think there's going to be some of that too. But, I think things are getting to the point where the level of experience, the level of service, the level of answers you can get from one of these LLMs is really quite phenomenal and getting better at a faster rate really than humans do.
I part of me wants to talk a little bit about that because we've seen a lot in terms of not just personalization, but also the employee experience, right? And I think you're sort of squarely at the heart of a lot of what that looks like when it comes to the learning paradigm, right? The skilling paradigm. I think about, I recently read, I guess I forget where it was, but forgive me, that Andy Jassy and the Amazon team are now unleashing culture bots.
Oh,
to
interesting. I didn't see that.
Yeah, to coach people in how they go about living the culture that they want to reinforce, right? That old innovative startup kind of mentality that was at the heart of Amazon when it was first hitting its stride, so to speak. I guess my question for you is that poses an interesting question to me because one, it's the bot being something more than is the typical way that we think about the bot, right?
Yep.
An assistive tool. In this case, it adds that coaching, that mentorship kind of thinking. How do you see AI kind of changing the concept of mentorship in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. Well, I'll make an assumption. Companies that do that, like Amazon, they've essentially built a local LLM, meaning they've built a secure LLM, which you can do, and added their data. It's a fascinating situation because you think about it. Well, let's just take a couple scenarios. I joined a company. I'm new to the company. How does the company get things done? What are the norms and behavioral accepted ways? Like, Do people tend to send mail? Do they tend to meet? Do they tend to call? What are acceptable meeting hours? Where do people go and get together? What are the values? That's one of those things where a culture bot could be super interesting, versus you got to go and ask your manager, or even worse, you just kind of got to watch and over 6 months absorb by osmosis. That's one area I think is super interesting. The other one is, we're looking at, like I said, doing this ourselves. There's lots of processes within companies across the board. How do we do performance reviews? How do we enter an opportunity, a sales opportunity? How do we interview somebody? And I've seen some really interesting uh, third-party podcasts where they talk about, hey, you can take a standard operating procedure that is not documented anywhere, go into this tool, walk the tool through, which is not an AI tool, but just a visual tool. You can explain it, ingest that into ChatGPT, ask it how to automate it, and then you can even take that into yet another tool like Cursor, which is a code generation AI tool, and spit out automation for it. So I think there's this opportunity to take, I'll call it tribal knowledge, industry specific knowledge, company specific knowledge, and formalize it in a way that makes it much more accessible to all employees. So and we haven't even talked about things like, for example, we use it for IT and cybersecurity as an example. And we do a lot of people new and a lot of people, even more people in career. People are trying to get certifications, CompTIA, Ethical Hacker, and others. We're amazing at that. And there are confusing terms. What does IPsec mean? What is a layer 3, level 3 protocol? What does that mean? You can query the LLM right in the experience.
Mhm.
You can ask LLMs to design curricula for you. Hey, Alex, you're my bio. I'd like to learn X because my managers told me this is an important skill. Can you share with me what you think the best resources are with links that you can do things like that? It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I actually had an experience like that not too long ago where I come from a field of psychology, right? And science, behavioral sciences. And one of the things that stands out is we have terms of art that, everybody knows, like validity and reliability and things like that, right? And I was working with a colleague trying to understand what makes validity and reliability, or independent validation and verification, or vice versa, right? And if you know the industry, anything like computing or anything like physical sciences, natural sciences, pharmaceuticals, that has a very different meaning. Even though generally they're the same kind of concept, very different meaning than what we refer to in my world as generalizability. And I was unable to teach the difference to my colleague until I asked ChatGPT or an LLM to explain it to me. In this case, it was Gemini, but still, it was fascinating to see the nuance that existed. So I see your point completely on that. That also speaks to the notion of, and I want to just touch upon, because you've hit upon it a little bit, but you talked about a little bit about the advantage that HR data has over other data because of the structure that goes around it, and more importantly, how well validated I think it is beyond just the existing data set that is my employee workforce kind of. I guess my question for you is, where do you see AI changing that? Will it add things like psychographic information? Will it start to really grow what we understand about our employees so that we can change the employee experience for the better?
The short answer is yes. I can see several ways. I'll go with the first one you mentioned, psychographic. As people do, many companies have personality. Whenever people think of them, Myers Briggs, Insights, you pick your favorite. We've probably both done them all. And as companies collect that, you can start to do interesting correlations using LLMs to say, okay, first of all, who does really well in the company? How does that relate to things like tenure, um, early exits, uh, promotion velocity? So there's a whole bunch of things you can do there. You can also look for interesting things like, okay, groups that tend to have these personality types, project groups compared to these. Well, these tend to outperform. So you can do really interesting things with that because you can feed it all into the LLM and have it look for correlations. So that's just one area. The other area we're seeing is, and we kind of touched on this. One of the interesting things about AI is we talked about AI as a productivity enhancer. It's also a massive global upskilling challenge. It's hard to think, Alex. You go out 5 years from now, 10 years, like, is there any functional discipline, HR, sales, marketing, finance, IT, where they're not going to have an AI aspect to it? Hard to say.
Yeah.
No, really hard. So how do people go get that? And this is where we see companies looking at, okay, and this is an area where maybe the data needs a little more work because it's not quite as formalized. Okay, what certifications matter to us? How do we do things like micro credentialing or skills badges? You know, I haven't tried it, but it'd be an interesting thing. I just thought of it, like ask ChatGPT to create I'll call it skill badge framework. We actually have one in our product, and we let companies create their own as well. So we provide built-in skill badges, we call them, and credentials. Companies create their own. But it's really interesting to look at that as well, because how you formalize skills, like, Alex is a great speaker, he's a great strategic thinker, he knows organizational psychology compared to, Scott does these things. How do you map those in a way where you can look across the company? In fact, one of the things that we think is a really interesting scenario in IT, I'll give this, apply equally well to HR. Hey, I'm a VP of IT. I've got a 20-person team. I need to put in a network firewall. Who is the best person on my team based on the skills that we've collected and they have to do that work? You can also use it for things like pre-employment assessments. We need to add somebody. Where are the gaps? So there's a lot of interesting things that combination of the data and the AI can do together.
It's fascinating. It almost speaks to, I look at it as three parts, right? It's the data, the human, and the artificial intelligence that are the machine that will drive any modern enterprise. Uh, I want to kind of hit upon one thing, and I'm going to ask you to wear your hat as a CEO, and it might be relevant considering you were we were in the green room, you were talking a little bit about kind of your strategic planning as an organization. I read in HBR at the beginning of September that there was a study that was published specifically looking at how CEOs are using large language models, right, and generative AI in particular. And the overarching kind of themes that popped up, aside from generating efficiency in their day to day and orchestrating things that they wouldn't normally have to take a more manual approach to do, the number one thing that sort of stood out was helping me see fourth dimensionally.
Interesting.
What I mean by that is really taking a deep dive into the future and telling me, what is it that I'm not seeing that would completely shift my business model? What is it that I'm not seeing that is not just disruptor, but is a different way of looking at what I have as an asset in business? I'd love to get your perspective on that. And selfishly, I want to ask you how you're using LLMs, but that's a separate question.
Yeah, I know. I've done variations of that. For example, it's a really interesting thing, and there again, you sometimes get the hallucinations, etc. So you'd have to look a little more carefully there because you're asking something that's unknowable. But what I like to do with it is I've used it in a bunch of ways. Like, okay, who are our competitors? What are our, what would you, if you were doing a strategic assessment from a competitor's point of view, what would you say about us and where would you go compete? I look at specific markets and say, what is the market given what you know about our company, what is the market opportunity in country X or vertical industry Y? There's a whole set of things you can do there. Now, and I do a lot of queries. I use it for a lot of things. I'll use it to check work. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things I'm looking at, in fact, we're having active interviews in the next week or two, is what I'm finding is just so many opportunities. I keep hearing about things like, oh, we could do that, we could do that. And in one situation in marketing, we actually brought somebody in who was a guru on applying generative AI to marketing. So we did the 3-hour training. and they were already using it, so I felt it was a good investment. And but I think in a lot of groups, what a lot of companies tend to do is say, okay, let's bring in the AI trainer, Alex. Let's bring them in, bring her in. Let's bring her, them in. We'll let them train, and then we'll be off to the races. And the reality is, I think people, they go back to their day jobs because they're busy, and B, they just don't say, "Wow, this could be done differently." I'm doing it. So I'm really looking. I don't know what the title is going to be yet, but I'm looking at having a direct report that sits on the executive leadership team of the company, and their job is kind of threefold. One, to actually help the rest of the company stay up to date and summarize, because we need somebody watching it, the state of AI.
Mhm.
Two, to look for opportunities partnering with our product leaders to apply it to help our customers. And then three, to partner with, I'll call it department leads, functional leaders at all levels within the company to go, okay, where are the optimal places to apply AI so that we can free up the people doing those to do other things that, for example, more valuable to the company and more interesting to them versus doing rote things. So that's an active discussion. In fact, it's funny, I'm having with my board right now too.
I'm fascinated by that concept because I think back to the executive order that we had from the administration just last year that looked at establishing an AI officer within every federal agency. Right, that was the first big sweeping thing.
Yeah, makes sense.
And what was fascinating is so much of the story around it was let's, talk about how we're going to comply with good, responsible use of AI. But the other side of the equation is how are we going to gain efficiency, be better as a government, and operate better as a government because we have an AI officer, right? So it was that strategy piece, those pieces that you were describing, presumably, right? Uh,
If you go back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, for a lot of companies, IT was not necessarily considered a strategic thing. I don't think there's a company of any size or scale today that doesn't think about IT being strategic. I kind of think of generative AI as that next part of the wave, and it's a potentially a bigger wave.
it's fascinating. You're absolutely right about that because I think about technology. Technology has co-opted all the things that we think about when it comes to strategy, transformation.
Yep,
It's fascinating. Every bit of the business is revolutionized in some way, but done so in a strategic way. And 30 years ago, you would never thought of that, right? So
exactly.
yeah. So Scott, from your perspective as a leader and a senior leader within organizations, I guess how can AI help senior leaders, HR executives, not only accurately identify, but also kind of successfully close skill gaps within the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, Alex. I think there's a few ways. Number one, you can use AI with human input to help derive a framework of what skills matter. Now, obviously, the senior leaders of any organization are going to need to look at that and say, does this make sense? Then you can work with the AI to actually and other tools to say, how do we assess for those skills? How do we understand the capabilities? What are the things we would look for different levels of a skill and different expertise? And then what can also be done is you can use an LLM to compare and contrast different groups. Something I mentioned early on is one of the things we're excited about with the product we're building is this opportunity long term to actually enable a leader at an organization to compare themselves to other peer organizations in their industry, in their region, state, country, city, and also to compare their own teams over time. So I think there's a lot of things that AI can do to help build the framework, assess for the capabilities, and actually train on the capabilities, do flashcards, have mentoring within an environment. So there's quite a bit there for skills development and closing skills gaps.
It almost sounds like AI can actually be that partner in really achieving that talent marketplace kind of mentality of the organization. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's such a novel way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and the other part I mentioned is also it applies equally well to hiring
Mhm.
and talent acquisition because if you think about it, why are we hiring somebody? Well, we need skills and abilities that person brings that we don't have or don't have enough of. So it really, that whole assessment, onboarding, understanding what's there is equally important on the talent acquisition side as well.
Excellent. I really appreciate you sharing that. So I'm going to jump in and I'm going to ask you two kind of final questions here.
Okay.
Number one is really looking, let's call it 5 years out, right? I know everybody wants to think that we're going to be batteries in the Matrix, or the Skynet's coming, and that's the popular story, right? But in reality, where do you see kind of the future of AI as it relates to the world of work? Where is it that we're seeing a shift for things like teachers, trainers, educators, and other leaders across the world of work?
Yeah, and you touched on Ethan Mollick earlier. He does a fantastic job. Highly recommended blogger in the world of teaching,
Yeah.
as well as AI in general. So what I'd say is, I think you know, there's the old Bill Gates quote that people underestimate the short-term impact, or overestimate the short-term and underestimate the long-term. So I'd say certainly within 10 years, I think people will expect to use AI agents as part of their job. It'll be built into most pieces of commercially available software in some fashion or form. I think companies will have a built-in in-company customized LLMs, and potentially multiple, like the HR LLM, the sales LLM. And I think it will be a very expected thing. And in some ways, the nature of work may change, which is, rather than opening, the blank spreadsheet or the blank piece of paper, I start with ChatGPT or equivalent. So that's definitely one part of it. The second part I'd say is, I do think the technology, the art of what's possible, the event horizon just keeps pushing out and gets larger and larger. So I'm excited about it. I think it's a great time to do this stuff.
I can appreciate that perspective. I really can. And so my final question is, in one word, one sentence,
Mhm.
what kind of guidance would you give an executive trying to change or transform their enterprise in the way they actually engage in employee experience? How would you convince them of AI as
I
the
have two words: be planful. And what I mean by that is, if you just hope it's going to organically happen within your company, I think executives are going to be, or in your group, I think they'll be disappointed. I relate the example of ACI, where I'm looking at, should we have a chief AI strategist and operations person? I'm increasingly thinking we should, who will accelerate it.
that's great advice. I really appreciate that. Well, Scott, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. I'm going to go ahead and say that we're going to do it for this episode, but I'm hopeful that we can bring you back at some point, because I just have a whole other episode on bots that I want to go into with you.
Okay, I'd love to do it, Alex. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, and the audience, have fun with the AI.
Big thank you to you, Scott. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and, more importantly, your insights. Before we say goodbye to the audience, I encourage you to follow the AI+HI project wherever you enjoy your podcasts. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to comment, leave a review, give me a thumbs up, give Scott a thumbs up, etc., whatever it is. Finally, if you can find all our episodes, or if you'd like to find all our episodes, please go to our website at shrm.org/AI+HI. Thanks for joining the community and the conversation today. We'll catch you the next time.